The auctioneer's gavel struck with finality as the crowd fell silent. Lot 37, German Shepherd, former military, deemed unsuitable for service. Starting bid, $200. In the back row, Ethan Blackwood clutched his checkbook. Knuckles white against the worn leather, the dog stood motionless in the metal pen, its ash-gray coat bearing visible scars, amber eyes vacant yet somehow alert. Unlike the pedigreed specimen sold earlier, this animal carried itself with the quiet dignity of a creature who had witnessed true danger. "No takers at 200, shame to put him down." The auctioneer sighed, already looking toward the next lot. Then, from the front row, a manicured hand raised. 500, called a voice smooth with privilege. Maxwell Richardson, in his tailored suit and ostrich leather boots, smirked as he glanced around the hall. The wealthy breeder's reputation for acquiring broken military dogs was known throughout Little Creek. None were ever seen again. "I have 500. Going once." "Ah," the auctioneer called. Ethan's throat constricted. His last paycheck, his truck repair fund, the small inheritance from Jason, all of it barely enough. 1,000! He shouted, his voice cracking through the barn's stifling air. Richardson turned slowly, cold eyes narrowing at the interruption. When their gazes locked, something unspoken passed between them, a challenge issued and accepted. The dog's head lifted slightly, amber eyes suddenly finding Ethan's across the crowded room, recognition flickering where none should exist. Ethan Blackwood had returned to Little Creek 3 months ago, hollow-eyed and carrying little more than his brother's folded flag and a duffel bag of worn clothes. At 32, his once promising career as a high school English teacher in Seattle had dissolved in the aftermath of Jason's death. Administrative leave, they'd called it, after he'd punched a wall during class when a student's phone rang with his brother's favorite song. Now he lived in the crumbling family ranch house, taking odd construction jobs and avoiding the pitying glances of townspeople who remembered him as the bright boy who'd escaped their dying mining town. The German Shepherd, designated only as K97734 on his auction papers, had come home with Ethan that afternoon, riding silently in the passenger seat of his rusted Ford pickup. The dog's military service record was sparse: 3 tours in Afghanistan, injured during an IED explosion, failed reintegration assessment, unpredictable stress responses was underlined in red. The attending veterinarian had recommended euthanasia, deeming him unsuitable for civilian adoption, but something in those amber eyes had called to Ethan with an intensity he couldn't explain. Little Creek. Montana hadn't changed much in the decade Ethan had been gone. The shuttered copper mine still dominated the valley's north end, its rusted equipment standing like industrial skeletons against the mountain backdrop. Main Street businesses struggled against the Walmart one town over, and the same families that had controlled the county for generations still did. Among them, none were more powerful than the Richardsons, whose vast cattle ranch and security dog breeding operation employed 1/4 of the town's remaining residents. Maxwell Richardson had built his fortune on government contracts, providing specially bred German shepherds to military and police departments nationwide. His sprawling estate stood in stark contrast to the modest home surrounding it, with its manicured grounds and state-of-the-art kennels visible from the highway. Few in town questioned Richardson's methods or motives. His contributions to the annual fall festival and high school sports teams bought silence and loyalty in equal measure. As night fell on Ethan's first day with Shadow, the name he'd given the dog on the drive home, he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. $1,000 spent, his savings emptied for an animal that stood rigid in the corner of his kitchen, watching him with wary, assessing eyes. the morning after the auction. Ethan woke to find Shadow standing at the foot of his bed, rigid and alert, not sleeping, not relaxed, just watching. When Ethan extended his hand, the dog backed away, maintaining a careful distance. This wasn't a pet. This was a soldier, damaged but still on duty. "It's okay, boy," Ethan murmured, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he dressed. His phone had already buzzed 3 times, his Aunt Martha, no doubt, ready to berate him for wasting money on a dog when the ranch's roof needed repairs. He ignored it, focusing instead on the immediate challenge connecting with an animal that clearly trusted no one. Breakfast was a silent affair. Shadow refusing the kibble Ethan had purchased at the general store on their way home. The dog, instead, positioned himself near the window. Watching the driveway with military vigilance, Ethan recognized the behavior Jason had described similar watchfulness in his letters from Afghanistan. "Always on guard," he'd written. "These dogs don't know how to turn it off." By midday, Ethan's patience was wearing thin. The dog wouldn't come when called, wouldn't take food from his hand, wouldn't acknowledge any attempt at connection. When the phone rang again, Ethan answered without checking the caller ID, desperate for any distraction. "You've made a serious mistake, Mr. Blackwood." Maxwell Richardson's voice was smooth as polished stone. "That dog is unstable, dangerous. Even I was bidding as a public service. My facilities are equipped to handle such animals humanely." Ethan's grip tightened on the receiver. "He seems fine to me. Has he eaten, approached you, shown any sign of adjustment?" Richardson's knowing tone sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "I'm prepared to take him off your hands. 1,500, a generous profit for your intervention. He's not for sale." Richardson's pause carried weight. "Perhaps you should discuss this with your aunt. I understand the ranch mortgage is several months behind. Shame if you lost the last of the Blackwood legacy over a dog." The call ended before Ethan could respond, leaving him shaking with anger. How did Richardson know about the mortgage? As if sensing the shift in mood, Shadow moved from his post by the window, still maintaining distance, but watching Ethan with renewed intensity. "What happened to you?" Ethan asked softly, sinking to the floor. "What did they do to you over there?" The knock that came at the door was sharp, authoritative. Dr. Sarah Redfeather stood on his porch, veterinary bag in hand, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, half Blackfoot and half Irish. Sarah had been 2 grades behind Ethan in school before leaving for veterinary college. "Heard you bought yourself trouble," she said without preamble. "Thought I'd check if you need help." Behind Ethan." Shadow growled low in his throat, the first sound he'd made since the auction. "Retry HT." Dr. Sarah Redfeather moved with deliberate slowness as she stepped inside Ethan's house, her eyes never leaving Shadow. "Military dog," she stated rather than asked. "Afghan theater, by the look of him." "How can you tell?" Ethan asked, closing the door behind her. "The specific scarring pattern. IED training leaves marks." Sarah crouched down, still maintaining distance from Shadow, who had backed himself into the corner of the living room. Hackles raised. "Plus, I worked with the Warrior's Best Friend program during my residency. Rehabilitated service dogs showed similar behaviors." Ethan watched as she opened her bag and placed several items on the floor between herself and Shadow, a worn leather collar, some treats, and what looked like a piece of canvas. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the kitchen table. At Ethan's nod, she retrieved something else from her bag and laid it on the table, a military ID tag. scratched and dulled with age. "Where did you get that?" Ethan asked, his voice suddenly tight. "Your brother sent it to me before his last deployment. Jason asked me to keep it for him." She pushed it toward Ethan. "Look at the service number." The tag read K97734, identical to the number on Shadow's auction papers. Ethan stared, uncomprehending at first, then felt the floor tilt beneath him. "This was Jason's dog, his partner." Sarah nodded grimly. "I wasn't sure until I saw him just now. Jason sent photos." "This is Ranger," that was his field name. "I'd recognize those eyes anywhere." The revelation struck Ethan like a physical blow. His brother's dog, the partner Jason had written about with such pride. He was reported killed in the same explosion that injured Jason. Ethan said, memory flooding back. Jason was devastated. "Clearly, someone lied," Sarah replied, her tone hardening. "The question is why?" "De." Shadow or Ranger hadn't moved from his defensive position, but his eyes were fixed on the ID tag in Ethan's hand. When Ethan tentatively approached with the metal tag extended, the dog's posture changed subtly. "Easy now," Sarah murmured. "Let him come to you." Ethan knelt 10 feet away from the German shepherd, holding out the tag. "Ranger," he whispered. "Is that you, boy?" The shift was immediate and shocking. At the sound of his name in Ethan's voice, so similar to Jason's, the dog's ears pricked forward. He took one hesitant step, then another, until his nose was inches from Ethan's outstretched hand. After a long moment of assessment, Ranger gently took the tag between his teeth and backed away. Tag clutched carefully. "He recognizes it," Sarah breathed. "And he recognizes something in you, too. You sound like Jason." The moment of connection was shattered by the sound of tires on gravel. Through the window, Ethan saw a county sheriff's vehicle pulling up his drive, followed closely by Maxwell Richardson's black SUV. "What now?" Ethan muttered, rising to his feet. Sarah's expression darkened as she peered out. "Richardson doesn't waste time. That's animal control with him." She turned to Ethan, urgency in her voice. "They're going to claim he's dangerous, that he should be seized for public safety. You need to decide right now how far you're willing to go for this dog." Ranger had retreated to the corner again, the tag still in his mouth, his body tense with alertness. Looking at him, Ethan felt a sudden fierce protectiveness surge through him, not just for the dog, but for his brother's memory, for everything Jason had loved and fought for. "He stays with me," Ethan said firmly, "whatever it takes." Sarah nodded, a small smile of approval touching her lips. "Then we better get ready for a fight." The weeks following Richardson's initial attempt to seize Ranger unfolded in a delicate dance of legal maneuvering and gradual healing. The county judge, a fishing buddy of Ethan's late father, had granted a temporary stay against animal control's seizure order, giving Ethan 30 days to prove the dog wasn't dangerous. Each day became a careful exercise in patience and persistence. Mornings began before dawn with Ethan sitting quietly on the porch, reading aloud from Jason's letters while Ranger maintained a watchful distance. The dog's rigid posture gradually softened as familiar phrases washed over him, inside jokes between handler and canine. Mission details only they would know, the shorthand language of partners who trusted each other with their lives. By the second week, Ranger had moved from the far corner of the porch to the middle step. Still apart, but present, Dr. Sarah Redfeather visited every other day, bringing specialized equipment and documenting Ranger's progress with clinical precision. PTSD presents similarly in dogs as in humans, she explained, demonstrating gentle pressure techniques to help ground Ranger during his occasional moments of hypervigilance. It's not aggression, it's survival response. Her careful notes would be their best defense at the upcoming hearing. The turning point came during a thunderstorm that rattled the old ranch house windows and sent lightning crackling across the Montana sky. Ethan woke to find Ranger standing by his bedside, trembling violently, ears flattened against his skull. "It's okay, boy," Ethan murmured, sitting up slowly. "Just thunder." But as a particularly violent crack shook the house, Ethan's own memories ambushed him. Jason's flag-draped coffin, the rifle salute, the unbearable finality of taps played over an empty grave, his breath caught, chest tightening in the familiar vice grip of grief. Without command or training, Ranger moved forward, pressing his body against Ethan's legs with firm, steady pressure. The dog's amber eyes locked onto his, unwavering and present. In that moment of shared trauma, the last barrier between them dissolved. When Ethan's hand found the dog's head, Ranger didn't pull away but leaned in, offering the same comfort he had once given Jason in far-off desert nights. By morning, they had reached an understanding deeper than words. Ranger slept beside Ethan's bed that night, and every night thereafter. Alert, but no longer remote. A guardian reconnected to his purpose. Word traveled quickly through Little Creek that the Blackwood boy and his dangerous military dog had become inseparable. Opinions divided sharply along predictable lines. Those beholden to Richardson muttered about irresponsibility and public risk, while others, particularly veterans from the VFW hall where Jason had been a member, rallied to Ethan's cause. Mike Clearwater, Ethan's childhood friend and now a deputy sheriff, stopped by regularly with updates on Richardson's movements. "He's pulling strings at the county level," Mike warned during one visit. "Got the commissioner talking about special ordinances for assault-trained animals." He watched as Ranger methodically retrieved items Ethan had purposely dropped, a technique Sarah had suggested to rebuild the dog's confidence. "Hard to see this as the killer Richardson's describing." "It was never about public safety," Ethan replied, rewarding Ranger with quiet praise. "But I still don't understand why lie about Ranger dying overseas? Why track him to that auction?" The answers began to emerge when Emily White River came into their lives, the granddaughter of the reservation's elder. Emily worked at the community center's veteran outreach program. She arrived at Ethan's door one afternoon with a cardboard box filled with Jason's personal effects items the military had sent to the program rather than directly to Ethan. "These should have come to you months ago," she apologized, her dark eyes serious beneath a practical bob of black hair. "I found them misfiled when I took over the program last month." Among the standard items, dog-eared paperbacks, a baseball cap, a wallet, was a small, weatherproof notebook with water-resistant pages, Jason's mission log, filled with his characteristic neat handwriting. Ethan flipped through it while Emily waited, not wanting to intrude on his grief but clearly concerned. "Jason was always thorough," Ethan murmured, then stopped abruptly at an entry dated 2 weeks before the explosion that had supposedly killed Ranger. Ranger alerted to something off about the supply truck. Handlers from private contractor Morrison Richardson dismissed concerns, flagging for coal. "Morris, something's not right." Second time this month, Ranger's been overruled by MR personnel. Emily watched as Ethan's expression hardened. "Morrison Richardson," she repeated. "Maxwell Security Company had contracts there. Apparently," Ethan continued reading, finding 3 more entries where Jason had documented growing concerns about shipments protected by Morrison Richardson's security teams, shipments that Ranger had repeatedly flagged but had been cleared by other handlers. "This could be why," Ethan said slowly. the pieces falling into terrible alignment. If Jason and Ranger were investigating something Richardson was involved in, Emily's eyes widened. And then both were killed in an explosion, except Ranger somehow survived and ended up back stateside, sedated and designated for destruction until Richardson found him at auction. Ethan closed the notebook, a cold knot forming in his stomach. My brother might have been murdered. Ranger padded over. Sensing the shift in tension, the dog pressed against Ethan's leg, his customary response to emotional distress. Emily noticed the behavior with professional interest. "He's grounding you," she observed. Classic response training for PTSD support. Someone invested serious time in developing that behavior. That someone was Jason. Ethan rested his hand on Ranger's head. He always said Ranger was special, could sense things other dogs missed, could connect with people in ways that couldn't be explained. Emily studied them both thoughtfully. The hearing is in 10 days. Richardson will have lawyers, witnesses prepped to testify about the dog's dangerous nature. "We'll be ready," Ethan replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. His savings were depleted, his legal knowledge non-existent, and Richardson's influence reached through every level of county government. "You won't be alone." Emily's voice carried quiet determination. "The veteran community protects its own, and that includes service dogs." She gestured toward Ranger. "Let me help. I've worked with the VA on cases involving service animals. There are protections we can invoke." For the first time since Jason's death, Ethan felt something like hope taking root. Whatever Richardson was hiding, whatever had happened to Jason, the truth was within reach, and at his side stood his brother's loyal partner, ready to complete one final mission together. The Little Creek County Courthouse hadn't seen such a crowd since the copper mines closure dispute a decade earlier. Every wooden bench was filled, with people standing 3 deep along the back wall. Richardson had ensured a strong showing from his supporters, ranch employees in pressed shirts, county officials who owed their positions to his influence, and 3 expert witnesses from out-of-state handlers who specialized in aggressive dog rehabilitation. Ethan sat at the defendant's table with Ranger at his feet, the dog's demeanor remarkably calm despite the crowd. Sarah Redfeather had administered a mild herbal sedative, just enough to take the edge off his anxiety, not enough to alter his behavior. She'd assured Ethan. Emily White River sat beside them, her professional black suit a stark contrast to Ethan's best flannel shirt and only tie. She'd assembled their case through marathon sessions over the past week, working from her small office at the community center until midnight. Fueled by determination and too much coffee, Judge Howard Wilkins entered, his thin frame stooped by age but his eyes still sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. At 82, he was the county's longest-serving judge and notorious for his impatience with procedural games. "Let's dispense with the formalities," he announced after the brief opening statements. "This is about whether this animal," he gestured toward Ranger, "poses a danger to this community. Mr. Richardson, present your case." Richardson's attorney, imported from a Helena firm at considerable expense, called their first witness, a former military dog trainer who testified about irreversible combat conditioning and predatory triggers in PTSD-affected service dogs. He'd never met Ranger, but spoke in grave tones about statistics and worst-case scenarios. The second witness, a county animal control officer who'd been present at Richardson's initial attempt to seize Ranger, described the dog's defensive growling as imminent attack behavior. Throughout the testimony, Ranger remained relaxed against Ethan's leg, occasionally scanning the room but showing none of the aggression being described. Several spectators noticed the disconnect. Whispering among themselves, Judge Wilkins observed the dog with narrowed eyes, making occasional notes. When the prosecution rested, Emily stood with quiet confidence. For our first witness, we call Dr. Sarah Redfeather. Sarah took the stand. Her veterinary credentials impressive even to Richardson's attorney. She methodically dismantled the previous testimony, explaining the difference between defensive posturing and genuine aggression, describing Ranger's remarkable progress over the past month. This dog displays textbook adaptive behaviors, not dangerous instability, she concluded, presenting the daily log she'd maintained documenting Ranger's rehabilitation. Next came Mike Clearwater, testifying in his official capacity that no complaints or incidents involving Ranger had been reported. Despite Richardson's claims of community concern, 4 local veterans from Jason's VFW post followed, each describing their visits to Ethan's ranch and positive interactions with Ranger. Emily saved their most powerful witness for last. The defense called Stanley Morrison. A collective murmur swept the courtroom as an elderly man with a trimmed white beard made his way to the stand. Richardson shifted in his seat, his usual composure fracturing. "Please state your name and relationship to the defendant," Emily directed. "Stanley Morrison, co-founder of Morrison Richardson Security Contractors." His voice carried the gravel of age and cigarettes. "Retired now. Maxwell bought me out 3 years ago." "And what can you tell us about the dog known as Ranger or K9 7734? Morrison looked directly at Richardson. "That dog was part of our elite detection unit in Afghanistan, specialized in finding contraband weapons, drugs, unauthorized items entering military bases, had the best nose in the program." "And what happened to him?" "Official report says killed in action alongside his handler." Morrison's weathered face hardened. "I never believed it. That dog had detection skills," certain parties found. "Inconvenient." Richardson's attorney leapt to his feet. "Objections, speculation, and irrelevant to these proceedings." Judge Wilkins waved him down. "I'll determine what's relevant in my courtroom. Continue, Mr. Morrison." Morrison leaned forward. Jason Blackwood had been documenting irregularities in shipments that Ranger flagged but other handlers cleared after they were both reportedly killed. "I found financial discrepancies in our accounting profits that couldn't be explained by our legitimate contracts." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the spectators seemed to hold their breath. "Your Honor," Emily said, "we submit that the attempt to seize and destroy this dog is not about public safety, but about eliminating evidence of criminal activity. Ranger isn't dangerous. He's a witness." Judge Wilkins removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Richardson, would you care to address these allegations?" Richardson rose slowly, his customary confidence replaced by cold calculation. "These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled former partner. I sought custody of the animal out of genuine concern for public safety." His gaze fixed on Ethan. "But perhaps we can settle this matter directly. Mr. Blackwood, I'm prepared to offer you $20,000 for the dog, here and now, cash." The offer hung in the air like a thundercloud. $20,000 would save the ranch, pay off the mortgage, give Ethan a fresh start. "No," Ethan replied, his voice quiet but firm. "He's not for sale." Judge Wilkins' ruling in Ethan's favor should have ended the matter. The court order was clear. Ranger would remain with Ethan, with monthly check-ins from Dr. Redfeather to document the dog's continued rehabilitation. Richardson had departed the courthouse without comment, his face an impassive mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. For 3 blissful days, Ethan allowed himself to believe they had won. On the 4th day, Ranger collapsed during their morning walk along the creek that bordered the Blackwood property. One moment, the German Shepherd was alertly scanning the tree line. The next, his powerful legs buckled, and he crumpled to the ground, his breathing shallow and labored. Panic seized Ethan as he gathered the suddenly limp dog in his arms, struggling to carry the 80-pound animal back to his truck. "Poisoned, Doctor," Redfeather confirmed grimly at her clinic, working frantically to stabilize Ranger while her assistant inserted an IV line. "Looks like strychnine. Probably in something he ate. Someone deliberately did this." Ethan's world narrowed to the examination table where Ranger fought for his life. Each labored breath a battle. The tremors racking the dog's body were agonizing to witness. Sarah worked with methodical urgency, administering activated charcoal, anti-seizure medications, and a powerful antidote she'd had to call in from the regional veterinary hospital. "We need to get him to Missoula," she said after an hour of intensive intervention. "They have dialysis equipment that can filter his blood more effectively than anything I can do here. He needs specialized care. Immediately." "Whatever it costs," Ethan replied without hesitation, though the reality of his financial situation crashed over him in the next moment. The judge's decision had preserved his custody of Ranger, but had awarded no damages, no compensation for legal fees. His checking account held less than $300. Emily arrived at the clinic within minutes of his desperate call, already on her phone securing emergency transportation. "The Tribal Council's medical helicopter is on standby," she informed him, her usual calm professionalism streaked with genuine concern. "They've agreed to transport him as a special favor to my grandfather." As they prepared Ranger for transport, Mike Clearwater pushed through the clinic doors, his deputy's uniform dusty from the road. "Found these scattered near your property line," he said grimly, holding up an evidence bag containing what looked like chunks of raw meat. "Already sent samples to the state lab, but I'd bet my badge they're loaded with poison." The medevac helicopter landed behind the clinic 20 minutes later, its rotors stirring up dust in the parking lot. Ranger was carefully loaded aboard, still unconscious but stable enough for the 40-minute flight. There was room for only one passenger. "Go," Emily urged, pressing a folded check into Ethan's hand. "The Veterans Emergency Fund. It'll cover the initial treatment. I'll follow by car with Sarah." The ascent was a blur, Ethan's hand resting on Ranger's side, feeling each shallow breath as the Montana landscape fell away beneath them. All he could think was that he was losing him, losing Jason's partner, losing the connection to his brother he'd only just rediscovered, and somewhere below, the man responsible was watching, waiting for his problem to finally disappear. For 72 hours, Ranger hovered between life and death in the veterinary intensive care unit. Ethan kept a relentless vigil, sleeping in a plastic chair beside the dog's kennel, leaving only when forced to by hospital staff. The specialists had been brutally honest. The poison had been administered in a massive dose, and while they'd managed to prevent complete kidney failure through aggressive dialysis, the long-term prognosis remained uncertain. On the 3rd day, as weak morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, Ranger lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's voice. The simple movement, those amber eyes focusing with recognition, broke something open in Ethan's chest. He pressed his forehead against the kennel door, tears flowing freely for the first time since Jason's funeral. Emily arrived with coffee and a change of clothes, her expression brightening at the signs of improvement. "Mike called," she said quietly, settling beside Ethan. "They found footprints at the creek, size 12 boots, steel-toed, matches one of Richardson's handlers. Not enough for an arrest, Not yet, but they're building a case. She hesitated. There's something else. That notebook of Jason's, I had a friend at the VA look at some of the shipment numbers Jason flagged. They were listed as agricultural supplies, but the weight distributions don't match any farm equipment. Weapons, Ethan said flatly. Or worse, my friend thinks opium processed into heroin stateside. Emily's voice dropped further. It would explain everything. The profits, the need to eliminate Jason and Ranger, the continued attempts to silence them both. The revelation should have shocked Ethan, but after days without sleep, his emotional reactions had been stripped to essentials. All that mattered was the dog breathing steadily in the kennel beside him. Richardson knows Ranger survived the poisoning by now, Emily continued. He won't stop. As long as there's a connection to Jason and those shipments, he's at risk. Ranger whined softly, struggling to rise, despite doctor's orders to keep him calm. Ethan opened the kennel door, allowing the dog to press against his side. The veterinarian had removed Ranger's IV that morning, replacing it with a simple bandage. As Ethan stroked his head, his fingers caught on something beneath the gauze, a small, hard lump under the skin at the base of Ranger's skull. "Emily," he said slowly, "feel this." Her brow furrowed as she gently probed the area. "Could be shrapnel. Dr. Redfeather mentioned he had retained fragments from the explosion." But something in Ethan's memory stirred Jason's last letter home, his excitement about new technology being tested with military working dogs. Ranger's getting a subdermal memory chip, he'd written. All his medical records, training logs, and mission data in one place, cutting-edge stuff. "It's not shrapnel," Ethan said, certainty blooming. "It's a data chip. Jason wrote about it. They were testing them with the K9 units. Everything would be recorded. Mission logs, handler notes, maybe even GPS data." Emily's eyes widened. If that chip has Jason's mission records from those flagged shipments, then Ranger's not just a witness, Ethan finished. He's carrying the evidence. They stared at each other as the implications settled between them. If they were right, the small device beneath Ranger's skin didn't just hold the key to Richardson's criminal operations, it contained the truth about Jason's death, and that made the dog infinitely more valuable and more endangered than either of them had realized. Spring came to Little Creek in a rush of green that transformed the Montana landscape. The Blackwood Ranch, once faded and forgotten, buzzed with activity as volunteers from the VFW constructed a series of training platforms and obstacle courses across the backfield. 6 months had passed since Richardson's arrest, a joint operation between the DEA and military investigators that had revealed a smuggling network far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The data recovered from Ranger's subdermal chip had provided the final evidence needed to connect Richardson to both the drug operation and Jason's death. Ethan stood on the freshly painted porch, watching as Emily worked with a young veteran and his newly assigned German shepherd. Her approach was gentle but firm, guiding rather than commanding, much as Jason had once described the best handlers. The Second Chance K9 program had been her idea, taking retired military dogs and pairing them with veterans struggling with PTSD. The pilot grant had come through just as the last of the winter snow melted, and already they had 5 handler dog teams in training. Ranger supervised it all from his favorite spot beneath the oak tree, his recovery complete save for a slight stiffness in his right hind leg on cold mornings. He'd become something of a local celebrity after the Richardson trial. But fame hadn't changed his fundamental nature. He remained vigilant, loyal, and possessed of that uncanny ability to sense when someone needed support before they knew it themselves. Dr. Redfeather's truck pulled into the drive. bringing their weekly supply of specialized dog food and medications. In the passenger seat sat a frail figure that made Ethan's heart skip. Jeremiah Blackwood, his father's older brother, had finally agreed to leave his assisted living facility for a visit. The old rancher had been too ill to attend Jason's funeral, an absence that had hollowed him with grief. Now, at 83, he'd insisted on seeing what his nephews had built. "This land was meant for healing," the old man said as Ethan helped him from the truck. "Your grandfather always said so. The Blackwoods were healers before we were ranchers." He watched as Ranger approached, the dog's pace measured and respectful as if sensing the old man's fragility. "This was Jason's dog." "Yes," Ethan replied simply. Some details were still too painful to share. Even now, Jeremiah extended a gnarled hand, which Ranger gently nuzzled. "Good boy," the old man whispered, tears gathering in his faded blue eyes. "Thank you for bringing my family home." That evening, after the veterans had departed and Sarah had taken Uncle Jeremiah back to town, Ethan and Emily sat on the porch steps with Ranger between them. The setting sun painted the distant mountains copper and gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wild grass and coming rain. "Jason would be proud," Emily said softly, her hand finding Ethan's in the gathering twilight. "Of both of you." Ethan nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. He thought of his brother, of the letters, the stories, the bond Jason had described with his K9 partner. He thought of all they had lost, and all they had unexpectedly found beside him. Ranger sighed contentedly, his mission complete, his purpose fulfilled, his family restored. Where there had been emptiness, there was now connection. Where there had been despair, there was now purpose. Where there had been a rejected dog and a broken man, there was now healing, not just for themselves, but for others walking the same difficult path back from darkness into light. In our twilight years, it's easy to believe our greatest contributions lie behind us, that our value diminishes with each passing season. But Ethan and Ranger's journey reminds us that renewal knows no timeline, and purpose often finds us when we least expect it. Like many of you, these characters carried invisible wounds, the grief of lost loved ones, the pain of unfulfilled dreams, the struggle to find meaning when society seems to look past you. Yet consider this truth: your deepest wounds may hold your greatest gift to others. The battles you've survived, the wisdom you've earned through suffering, these aren't burdens to hide, but treasures to share. There's someone who needs exactly what you've learned. Perhaps, like Ranger, your purpose isn't finished but transforming. The skills that served you in one chapter might save someone in the next. Remember, it's never too late to find your mission, to build something meaningful from broken pieces. Your story isn't over. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin when we think the book is closing. This is your moment to create a legacy that extends beyond yourself, to be the guide someone else needs on their journey home.